love does not envy. I don't think I can do that. How about this? It's not boastful or arrogant, right? It's not proud or rude. Proud or arrogant, I think, is the same word. The NIV, this is the NIV. The NRSV is what you saw on the screen, and does not dishonor. Dishonor is the NIV. Rude is the NRSV that you have. And then today we have three more that we're going to do. Three things that it's not. The not version of things is sometimes not as enjoyable because it doesn't describe what it is so much as to say, this is how you mess it up. This is how you mess up love. And it's not self-seeking. The NRSV says that it does not insist on its own way. So that's the first of the three that we're going to focus on today. It does not insist on its own way. It's not self-seeking. And the NIV says it's not easily angered. And I like that interpretation because it does give a different flavor from it's not irritable, which is the second thing that we're going to go through today. It's not irritable, but it's not easily angered. And I think that there is something in the Greek that really does bring out the word anger, that thought of anger. It's not easily angered. And this is a really awful drawing of a record, right? Keeps no record of wrongs. That's the NIV. Actually, I don't even think this is the NRSV. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing. I don't think that's quite right. So I'm actually going to reread it, and I want you to try to place this because I think that in my original description that it does not rejoice in wrongdoing. I think it's actually more closely appropriate to say it keeps no record of wrongs.
Doesn't remember.
There's no record of wrongs. And that too is important because there is something in the Greek that makes you think of a tally mark, of keeping some sort of record, some kind of record keeping. But it does, I'll just go through the rest of these just for the sake of it, for the fun of it. It doesn't delight in evil. It rejoices with or in the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. Love never fails. And of course, our first two that we skipped over, love is patient, love is kind, right? Love is patient, love is kind. That's the first two. They're out of order. But love never fails. As we do start today, though, I want to start with this reminder for us all. Before I do that, I did say I was going to read it again, so you could sort of think through the translation issue here with self-seeking NIV versus the NRSV. Love is patient, love is kind. Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. Those are the ones over here. All right? It does not insist on its own way. Does not insist on its own way. It's self-seeking. It is not irritable, easily angered, irritable, or resentful. And this is the interesting thing that when I looked up this resentful, it's actually like keeping a record of wrongs. That's the one that I refer to that has like a tally, sort of an interpretation of a tally, where there's a record keeping. And I just wonder, I'm sorry, I gotta get a tissue for a second. I wonder today if we could start off by kind of taking a step back and remembering that these are all God's qualities that can work in and through us, that we can love like this, but only because this is who God is. I want to take a step back and look at that because I just want to make sure that you know, am I seriously preaching this whole time with no mic?
Yes.
I am so sorry. I think that's the first time I've ever done that. I literally, for everybody on the live stream, I'm so sorry that I'm so harebrained that I just preached for like 5 minutes with no mic. I just love to hear my own voice, I guess. I don't know. But taking a step back and looking at all these things, I want to remind all of us, myself included, that this is not me trying to be this. This is not an example of what I'm trying to accomplish in my life. This is the quintessential demonstration that we're not trying to be this, because love never fails. And that is so contrary to what we are. We will fail. What all of this is a reminder for us of who God is and who God can be through us. We're trying to sort of step into God's realm, not just behave out of good self-discipline or all of the things that we do to be better people in this world. It doesn't matter how many self-help books you read, we're going to mess these things up, and it is truly divine that we do them. It's something that's divine. You can say, well, then you must be a really bad person. Yes, I am. Yes, we all are. We will all fail in these things. Part of that big picture, painting that big picture I want to go to today is, I want to ask you if you had, I didn't write anything on here, but just pretend that there's a list on here. And this is your list of sins. This is your list of sins. Do you want me to unroll it and reveal all of your sins this morning? How long would this list get? How long would it go? That would be a fraction. If I had a list of my sins, it would roll right out that door. Right in through Clinton. Right across the Phillipsburg. I don't know where it would go to. But it would just keep going and going, wouldn't it? Is that the right direction? Is that Phillipsburg over there? This list is a list that we all have, that God has just said, you know what? Fresh start. Forget about it. I'm not going to keep that list, God says. It's gone. In the vernacular, we call it the sea of forgetfulness, even though I don't really think that's scripture, per se. But there is this idea, of course, the psalm that we often share together in our assurance of pardon, as far as the east is from the west, so far he removes our transgressions from us. We are reminded constantly that God forgives us, and that's a great starting point for all of our thoughts on what it is that love is. Because it originates with God. It's something that we would struggle to do on our own. In fact, it would be impossible to love like God without God in us. That being said, if God can get rid of your list, what should that, of course, drive us to do for others around us? Can we then be God for other people? And now, when you push that in certain directions, I always have to say, it's not okay to stay in an abusive relationship.
I always want to remember to say that because I don't want any of you to be hurt by others and to think that that's your place, that that's somehow carrying your cross for Christ. No. It's healthy, it's good to get out of abusive relationships. And yet, in most of our relationships, we want our own way. You know, that's a hard truth to face. There is something about sin that is hard to face. And really, when you think about what sin is, it's really, it's a removing from God. It becomes something that's selfish, that is somehow not loving, right? That's the ladies' Bible study and something that was written in a Max Lucado book. Ladies, did you read about the interpretation of the word devil, diablos, and what that means? It divides, right? Yes. That divider, that dividing, that tearing away is something that's just not God. It's a perfect demonstration of sin, right? And when we insist on our own way, when things have to be our way, we're dividing. When we are irritable or easily angered, we're dividing. We're tearing away from other people. When we keep a record of wrongdoing, a record of wrongs, and resentful is the NRSV, which is, to me, it's the biggest stretch, but it's the most enlightening in a sense, because we could say resentful, but really when you examine what it is to be resentful, you are keeping a record. It's as if you are storing within yourself somewhere that thing that they did to me. And you walk around and you know, you can recall it at any moment because it lives with you. All of these things are dividing things that do, like, they have that great potential to divide and to hurt other people. And maybe I should look at my notes too. How about that? God's love, on the other hand, is potent and powerful. And this is sort of an inspirational thought for me to really try to ask God to do something in my life. To consider God's potent and powerful love in contrast even with other forms of love. Of course, we've talked about, the philos love that's like brotherly love, like Philadelphia, like it's that kinship love. But then you have eros, the erotic form of love. And yet it seems that even Jesus honestly kind of describes another kind of love when he talks about, he gives this story where even the fathers of the world, even people within a family love one another. Even a father loves a child, right? Even someone that's not godly. It's almost like there's this understanding that there's this other sort of form of love that's out there that's in the world. God's love is potent and powerful. It does heal hurts. It does relieve anxiety. It does remove guilt. It does give true guidance. And it does build faith. There are so many descriptors that we could give to God's love for us. I want you to think for a moment of what God's love has done for you. Think of those moments where you first became conscious of you as a follower. However you describe it. You might call it your salvation experience and view it as you choosing God, but God had already chosen you, right? Right? You began, whatever happened, at least one accurate description of that time period for you was that you began to consciously choose to follow God. It was that love that God has for us that already worked in our life. It could have been in moments, it could have been in years prior to that time period. But God's love was at work somehow. And it caused us to say, okay, now I'm going to somehow actively live in gratitude. I'm going to begin to be a follower. God's love is the catalyst for even our best thoughts. As we think this morning of these three things within us, being self-seeking or easily angered or keeping records of wrongs, these things might sound really bad, but they are very subtle, aren't they? They're subtle in our lives. I wish I could recall who did this. I think it was a comedic presentation in a television show or a movie that I've once seen. But maybe you can recall it for me. I even did a Google search and I couldn't figure out what it was from. But I know I have seen someone be offended in this show, and they would pull out their book. I thought, I'm going to put you in my book. And they would write it down. They would write it down. You're in my book. That's it. Anybody know what that might be from?
Big Bang Theory.
What?
The Big Bang.
Big Bang Theory, they used it? Sheldon did that? Yeah, I guarantee you I didn't see that. That's not what I'm thinking of, but that's awesome. I suspect there are probably a lot of illustrations of this in pop culture. In my mind, it's an old show. It might even be like, I don't know why, but it's sepia tone. It's like close to black and white kind of thing. But I don't know. I don't think it's Rain Man, but you guys have all seen this happen, though, right? No? You haven't seen that in any examples? Oh, man. It's a great illustration of what really happens within our hearts. When somebody does something, we can so easily, if not write their name down in our book, we put them in a category. We throw them over in that category. You can sit in this category in my heart, in my brain, with all those other people that are hurtful people, and I'm going to write you off. To be resentful is like that. You put them down in your book. That's why I loved showing that long list of things that we've done wrong, because it's a reminder for us that we really should be in a book that's not the Lamb's Book of Life. It's by grace that we are there. It's by God's loving grace. And remember, grace giving us something that we don't deserve, whereas mercy is not giving us a punishment or a consequence that we deserve. We are all recipients of God's grace and mercy. And that's the challenge. So what is the solution to not present ourselves in other people's lives in a way that insists on our own way? What does that even look like, really? I mean, I know I'm talking about it, but do we really understand what that means? And I know it can mean a million different things. But to not show up and require and need, in order to be pleased, you have to do the thing that I want. I think we're all left to sort of apply that to the million scenarios that we find ourselves in. Lord, help us to not show up needing the whole world to do what we need. I apply that to our church. I apply that to our attendance. Do we need the world to show up here to meet our needs? No. Think of it like this. We want to show up with God in the world to meet their needs. That's the same with our relationships. We show up in our relationships hoping that God can work in a way to be all those beautiful, powerful, and potent things that I said before about God's love. Things like removing guilt, giving guidance, giving hope. That's what people need. Lord, help us to not be self-seeking, Lord. insisting on our own way. Help us to not be irritable. Boy, I don't know. This would be awful to be, any of these would be awful to be labeled like this is who they are. But to be the irritable guy, I don't want to show up in everybody's life and just be the irritable guy. Wow, that is an awful witness, isn't it? Help us, Lord, to be the exact opposite of that. To bring grace and joy and love. And the record of wrongs, that record of wrongdoing, boy, how do we let go? This reminds me of the thing that I said earlier about it being divine. We can read the self-help book and get the psychologist to give us wisdom, but at the end of the day, all of those things that other people do that hurt, or that they do that are wrong, even if it doesn't hurt us and we're just keeping track of everyone else's sins, boy, what does that do? It divides, doesn't it? It creates categories. How do we not be like that? You could say, well, just let it go. But the reality is that it's stored within us somewhere. Whether we want it to be written down or not, there's something about even our biology that tends to write this kind of thing down. It's even sort of like a defense mechanism, isn't it? I mean, when you think about the true science of you touch fire one time, that's all it takes. Yeah, I mean, I was concerned at one point about Joshua touching the boilers when they're like, 212 degrees, not the radiators. And someone told me, well, he'll only do it once. It's the most awful thing to say, and yet it's true. It's true. There is something about our biology that does store these things so that we don't get hurt again. How do we overcome feeling hurt like that? If I could tell you, I would be a multimillionaire and have the best-selling book ever. Because really, it is divine. How do we get over hurts? Boy, with God's help, you could say, well, there's this practical, real-world thing called time, and you can talk about it. Yeah, yes, I get it. But how does that really happen? It's through God. And I do believe that there is something divine in all of these things that can help us to be God in the world. But it can't just be because we say we're going to let ourselves go. We're going to just show up and we're just going to be selfless. We're just going to show up and choose to not be irritable. Boy, if you've got that kind of power, teach me. And it's not far-fetched to say that you can't just show up and not keep record of wrong either. You can't just be out in the world. It's almost something that is truly divine. So if it's not let it go, if it's not let yourself go, if it's not let your feelings go, you want to sing Let It Go with me this morning? I know you've all been thinking it as I've said it. Let it go, let it go. Okay, enough of that. If it's not let it go, what is it? It's a prayer, isn't it? It's our prayer. As we work out who we are and who God is in the world, maybe it's take it away. I can see that for the record of wrong. Take that away, God. Don't let me store those things up. Help me, Lord, to let it go. Take it away. Maybe for the self, when we show up in the world, we show up in our relationships. You know what I mean by that. Just as we are who we are with other people, as we are in those moments, It's maybe not, Lord, let me just be less, but you be more. Let me be you in this relationship. Let me project who you are. Not irritable. Lord, not just let it go, but let me be patient. Let me be loving. Help me, God, be like you are. It's not just always take it away, but God show up. It's a part of our prayer in everything that we do, isn't it? Lord, help us to love. I hope that there's something here for you today. Something to think about. Some way for us to examine how we can be more loving in this world. I want to go back to the beginning of that scripture. Paul is talking to people in 1 Corinthians who are ranking gifts of people in the church, and they think that there are certain gifts that are better than others. And Paul is saying to them, you can have faith that can move a mountain. You can do these great and mighty things. And he sort of categorizes it. He categorizes it in things that you can do, faith that you can have, whatever it may be that we can do. He reminds us that it's nothing. It's nothing without love. And I say that because there is something about showing up in our relationships where we can so easily think that how good we are and our own way is so good that it must be from God. And we can think that we ourselves are God's gift to them. That might, I don't know if that lands for you. I don't know if you really quite catch where I'm going. But we can confuse who we are very easily with God's goodness to us, as if we are the good thing. We can misunderstand that. We could think that God has sent us to teach someone something. And that's our way. We insist on our own way. But in so doing, we sort of forfeit God's love. We can show up and think that this way is the right way. It's the right way to think. It's the right thing to do. And you know what? It bothers me that you don't do that. And we can confuse ourselves. And we can think that this is God's way of showing us what's right and wrong. But God's love's not irritable. So if we're irritated, that should speak to us. But we want to justify things, right? And we can keep this record of wrong. We can say, well, that's because God has shown me what's right and wrong. And we could subtly miss the point. Even though God does help us to know what's right and wrong, we're not the scorekeeper. We're not the record keepers. That is God's work. Our hope is that God could love through us. Help us, Lord, in all of these things to take ourselves out. All of these things have something to do with letting God be God through us. And that means that we somehow are humble, submissive, meek. I'd like to be the greatest thing since sliced bread, right? We'd all like to have the answers, to be the right person at the right time. And sometimes God does use us in those ways. But when it divides, I wonder if that is God's love or something that we have brought that's not loving. When it truly causes division or hurts others. And I know there are scenarios where you could say, but Rick, this. What about this? And I know that there's reality there. There are some scenarios where there really is a wrestling match, a gray area. But ultimately, love does bring us together. It does cause us to honor God together. So if you didn't like this sermon, put me down in your book. If you don't like that it's 20 till, put me down in your book. I pray that you can forgive whatever I've gotten wrong, and that we together can be challenged to love more and more because of who God is. Amen.